Hey, I'm Matt. I'm going to be talking today about optimizing delivery with SlackOps here at Replit. So who am I? I'm Matt. I lead SRE and security here at Replit, and I've been at Replit since February 2021, joining as Replit's first SRE back then, and we've grown the team since. Before Replit, I had 7 years at Google being an SRE, working in corporate engineering and Gmail. And you might be asking, what's Replit? It's a developer platform to build, run, and deploy code with zero setup. It's your own computer in the cloud, and we have resources that can help you scale all the way to infinity and beyond. And we're on the cutting edge of multiple technology trends, founded in 2016, and today we're a $1 billion VC-backed company. We just keep on growing with 23 million developers across 200 countries, 100,000 projects published per month. And we've just seen a huge growth in the last 6 months of, over 3,000% growth in AI projects. So you might be now thinking, okay, why does Replit need to optimize? Well, we're continuously shipping and we have extreme ownership of changes. What that means is that we don't have a QA department that's responsible for testing every change before it goes into production. Instead, we expect our engineering team and anyone else who's shipping code into production to have full ownership over the changes that they're making. That means that they're building them, they're testing them, they're making sure that everything is working correctly, handling flag changes, all that kind of thing. What that looks like in practice is that we have 50 plus merges to main in our popular repositories on busy days. And those 50 plus merges end up being, on some of our busiest days, 35 deployments to production. What that gives us is a fast iteration cycle that helps us test our assumptions, experiment, and really quickly get code back out of production if we really need to, so we can handle reverts and things like that quickly. You might think it's crazy to have 35 deployments to production. It's definitely an interesting journey to try and make that as optimal as possible. That's why we're talking about optimizing continuous delivery today. We have to ask ourselves a bunch of questions when it does come to the optimization, and this is a continuous process. So, for example, these questions might be like, how do we optimize the flow to be fast, but still safe? How do we streamline the internal developer experience, which matters a lot to us? How will these systems scale as we grow, both in user base, but also in the number of staff that we have at Replit? And then we're also talking about how do we set ourselves up to iterate on our deployment flows in the future, so that, say that we want to add a different type of deployment or we change our continuous deployment system, we want to be able to set ourselves up really well for that. To understand what we're optimizing, we have to know how it started. And so a few years ago, Replit was hosted on Heroku. The obvious choice at the time was Heroku ChatOps. Heroku ChatOps uses / commands to perform actions, or at least at the time, that was the primary interaction method. We encountered a range of weird use cases as well with Heroku ChatOps, things like we could promote 2 builds too quickly and that would cause downtime. We also found that it was possible for certain types of races to happen. So there could be a promotion that you ran in Slack and then it deployed a newer build than you intended just because of the timing. So we moved off Heroku in 2021. We needed something new. And so we started to think about, okay, how can we optimize this flow? How can we make this the best it possibly can be? So first things first, in our optimization process, we wanted to analyze the existing flows. So first up, every single build or every single promotion required typing something into Slack. So we had to document that. We had to onboard people into that. It's just not great. On the other hand, we also had issues with bypassing Slack. So if you go ahead and go to the UI and click that approve button, that information doesn't necessarily come back into Slack. And so you can get confusion about the state of production. Folks can be unsure about what's actually going on. It just ends up being confusing for everybody. We also wanted to go back to some first principles. So we actually wanted to look at, are we doing these things because we actually have to, or are we doing them because the system requires us to? And so by going back to first principles, we took all of those constraints out and we said, what would be the ideal system for us? And then we can tune it later. The other thing that was really important to us was figuring out how people work and where they spend their time. And so remote work for Replit meant that Slack was the hub for everything. And so what we ended up deciding was SlackOps seems like a great flow to sort of optimize. We've taken the Heroku chat ops, we've used that for a long time. Now let's continue on and use Slack as our sort of main interface. You might be asking why Slack, and really for a lot of companies these days, and at least for Replit, it was and still is our hub of communication. Of course, if our team was on Discord or Teams or some other chat platform, then chances are we could have built for those platforms as well. It really isn't specifically Slack. It's really more about chat ops. For us, we used Slack's UI kit to be able to have links to common tasks and buttons for key actions. So everything's very interactive in Slack. The Slack bot also holds builds until approvals are given. So we can't accidentally go ahead and promote a newer build because the bot is basically not allowing you to approve that yet. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but we also have things like multi-approval flows. And the implementation sort of phasing was that we did this for our website first, and then we brought it to other infrastructure at a later date once we had proven sort of the flow works. Once we had something that worked, it was all about incremental improvements and continuing to optimize the flow based on real, actual usage, and to understand where we maybe missed the mark on sort of understanding those first principles breakdowns or where the flows were needing to be optimized. So at the very beginning, we just had simple UI. We just wanted to replace slash commands. We wanted some buttons. We wanted interactivity. But over time, we continued to identify where are the friction points, where are the pain points, what do we need to do to make this better? And so one example of this that happened very early was multi-approval, where we're shipping a batch of commits to production. So we actually will, while CI is running, we'll sort of merge new commits that come in on main so that we don't spend all of our time running CI. Same thing in continuous deployment. While one build is rolling out, we're sort of queuing up other builds that are sort of pending to go into production, and then we keep track of the commit range that's about to be deployed. What that means is that we have a number of authors that are in every single basically build that goes to production. And so multi-approval gives us the ability to say every single one of those authors needs to sign off before that goes into production automatically. Of course, there's always escape hatches. There's always ways that we can force a deployment to happen earlier or something like that. But multi-approval is the default state. We also have reminder bumps. So early on, we realized that folks would start pinging these threads just naturally. I've got code that wants to go into production. Somebody else is distracted and, maybe in a meeting, and they haven't noticed that it's sort of pending them in Slack. And so we added these bumps that would ping the Slack thread every 30 minutes, just so we can make sure that these approvals keep flowing and then the code keeps getting rolled out. And then we also have additional improvements that we thought of, like being able to do rollbacks from the thread in Slack, and things like skip and abort semantics that allow us to control the batching of commits and allow us to also manage the release train and be able to say, hey, we need to actually halt everything. Let's abort this deployment and wait, and we can resume it later when, a revert has been landed in CI, or if there's some other thing that's going on that we really need to just shut everything down for a moment. And another incremental improvement that's really valuable and a huge optimization for us is bidirectional sync. So you can also make all of the approvals and you can do all of the work you need to do in our CD system. And we've designed it so that we have webhooks, and those will actually reflect back to Slack. So if a build is allowed to go to production from the continuous deployment system, then the Slack threads will all update, the approval buttons will go away, the UI will completely shift. And that gives us the ability to avoid this confusion where Slack says one thing and the system says another thing. To give you an idea of what this actually looks like in practice, these are some example messages that our infrastructure is sending as part of this process. And these are recent messages. So this is at the end of a long journey of optimization. Of course, the journey is not done yet. There is always more to be done. But you can see here, for example, we have a configurable information line per application. So approvers can see, hey, this new version is running in staging and it needs approval. It just gives a hint to the people that are sort of reviewing the build of things that you might need to think of, or like, hey, this is now running on this URL, click on it and you can see the staging environment before this goes to production. We have links to the continuous deployment platform and the GitHub diff, so it's very easy for someone to go ahead and just click on that view on GitHub link, and they'll be able to see the full diff view and see exactly what's in that change, which is a really big deal when it comes to just making sure you know exactly what it is that you're meant to be testing and exactly what's about to go out to production. You can see we also have some deployment metadata. So we have our approvals, we've got our commits. We're adding in features like being able to have unique links in there. So an application could have a link to its staging environment or to other documentation that gives you hints on what you might need to do to test that might be a little bit out of the ordinary. We also, you can see that we have these buttons, ship it, skip, abort, mark this build as broken. And these are all the interactivity elements that really control the actual flow of the deployments. So I can click on ship it, get a build to go into production. I can click on skip, and that'll ask the system to sort of queue up another build. And whatever's pending behind this single entry in the release train will also then be released and be able to be sort of approved again. So there's a few little features like that we found to be really helpful, and the interactivity is a really big deal. We have multi-approval, so the system keeps track of who authored commits in the batch and who has said, yes, I'm good to go, please ship this code to production. And so once you've reached the end of all the approvers list and the code gets deployed, if there's still something pending, then we don't let it go without sort of a forced deployment. And the multi-approval stage just gives us the ability to make sure that every single person is good to go, everyone's happy, and also means that folks can take that extreme ownership of their changes, validate that they work, make sure that someone isn't, skipping the sequence and shipping something that's potentially broken into production. And on the subject of shipping broken things in production and such, we also have a lot of information that comes back from the continuous deployment system. For example, we have notifications that a deployment has failed or is completed successfully. Both of those are very valuable. We also have informational messages like, hey, deployments have been paused. Someone has jumped in and has said, hey, something has gone wrong. We need to abort deploys for a little while. We need to get a revert landed. And then there's a more interactivity there to click a button to resume the trains and things like that. What's interesting is that this is useful for so much more than just shipping code. And so we have this great approval system. This is kind of a little bit maybe actually code, but we're using this flow for infrastructure as code. So we have Terraform plans that can run. We can identify drifts by noticing that there is a diff in a Terraform plan. And then that goes ahead and gives you an approval button in Slack, and you just hit that button and that goes out into production. And so we've been able to automate a lot of our infrastructure as code by still making sure that people are looking at plans and being really intentional about what's happening. But we're also looking at other procedures. Things like documentation updates would be a really big deal. Things like secure procedures, so provisioning a user or actioning ACL requests. All of these processes require approvals, and it would be great for us to be able to say, hey, this system can look after that. All we need to do is just have the right hooks in place to make that possible. And so we've taken the trade-offs that are necessary to go ahead and avoid any hard dependencies on a specific CD system. And so that means that we could integrate an ACL management system alongside our existing system that deploys code to production. Through this journey of optimization and trying to find all these different ways to make this Slack bot great, we've learned a lot. So one key example of this is that it's actually possible to expose too much information. And so a lot of the continuous deployment systems that we use or have used and have qualified in the past are very information dense. They're excellent for SRE to be able to come in and see everything that's happening across the world. It's not so great if you just want to know where your code is or what's going on with your commit. And so we've identified that we can also make the same mistake in our Slack UI. So we have to be really careful about how much information we're providing and give people the ability to go after that information, but don't present it to them by default. There's a lot of polish that we also have to do. So when things go wrong, that's where the polish is really necessary. links to tools, documentation, giving on-callers really clear direction. All that stuff's really important. We need to identify friction points and solve them, but we also need to identify the compromises. So I talked multiple times about batching commits, and that's how we basically do all of our deployments, is that we take a bunch of commits and we batch them and we send them out to production. Gives us a higher velocity, makes it a lot harder for us to isolate errors to a single commit though. We're also working on providing clear escape hatches. So when the automation doesn't work properly, we need to be able to give people a way out. We need to make sure that it's clear what's going on and give them a button or a way that they can actually navigate that particular situation. And then finally, we're just automating all the tedious and error-prone actions. So the more that we build this, the more we're finding, okay, we have to do this manual process. We have to click this and then click that and then make sure we read this. And we're trying to find ways continually to optimize that and take the tedious away so that engineering can just focus on exactly what matters, which is just shipping great product. As far as things to optimize next, we're never done. There's always something else that we can optimize. And so we're looking at a few things. Better audit log for builds that shipped is a great example. We want to be able to see everything that is shipped over a period of time. Slack channels are scrollable and searchable, but the signal to noise can be poor. There's a lot of challenges around rollback flows and reverts, and they're typically used in stressful situations. When people are stressed, stuff doesn't work properly, all of that gets amplified and the emotions are definitely a struggle. And so we want to make sure that everything is really streamlined so that we're not contributing to those negative emotions in those stressful situations. We're actually helping sort of guide people through that. We're also looking at things like auto canceling builds. So, we were talking earlier about every 30 minutes, we ping an approval thread if no one is if we haven't seen anyone completely approve. And auto cancel gives us the ability to just say, okay, we're going to bring in some new commits and then we're going to keep trying to get this thing into production. And then, it's very much non-technical, but onboarding is always an area that can be optimized. So today we have to map GitHub accounts to Slack accounts to be able to make pings work so that folks can be pinged in Slack. That's a little bit messy. It'd be great if there was ways that we could optimize that. There are also a wide range of ways in which new team members can get stuck when things go wrong. And the problem is that they could spend months shipping code to production and it only sort of breaks maybe 3 months into their time at Replit. And now they're realizing, oh wait, I don't actually know what to do when something goes wrong. And so there's always work to be done on the onboarding and sort of hand-holding in that sense. So to summarize where we're at, we have built a Slack bot and we continue to optimize it to optimize our deployment flows. The thing is for us is that Slack is just the hub that we use for communications. There's no reason why you couldn't do the same thing in your company with any other chat platform that you have internally. What we have continued to find is that breaking things down to first principles is just so valuable when we're thinking about optimization, thinking about the flow that we actually want and thinking about the approach that we really care about is more important than figuring out what the system offers us today or, the gaps that the current system has. And that way we can focus on what we actually care about and what actually matters. We also have to think about not over abstracting at first. We need to make sure that we're building something that's going to last, but also is going to be able to be iterated upon quickly and we're not getting stuck in the deep nest of abstractions that we create too early in the process. We always have a list of what we want to improve next. We sort of discussed it on the previous slide, but it's definitely something that is always on our minds. What are we doing next? Where are we going next? How are we improving this and how are we optimizing our internal developer experience? And finally, I think the most important detail of them all is these are internal experiences. These are internal tools, but you can't forget to optimize user experience even so. Just because it's an internal tool doesn't mean that we can't spend a lot of time optimizing it, and anything that we can do to make our internal developer experience better pays off in a big way for the velocity of the company and for the velocity of our engineering team. So that is pretty much where we're at with the optimization of delivery at Replit using SlackOps. By all means, reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter or email if you have any questions or are curious about any more details. But otherwise, appreciate your time and enjoy maybe exploring optimization of your own delivery using a little bit of Slack magic. Have a good one.